Hello everyone, so we're back for video 2. I hope that you enjoyed video 1. We're going to do a quick recap just to talk about what happened in the first few chapters. The first video was from pages 1 to page 18, and now we're going to start on chapter D-Day, D-E-E dash D-A-Y, D-Day. But before we get started, let's talk about where we are so far. So, in the first few chapters, we were introduced to two of the main characters. We were introduced to Sid, and we were introduced to Dee. So, with Sid, we found out that Sid is Jewish, and during this time, Jewish people were made fun of very badly. And so, he was made fun of and called Sid the Yid, which was a slur towards Jewish people, all during basic training. And then Dee tried to stand up for him, and we can tell in the first part of the book that it bothers Sid, but that he and Dee are really close. And then we get to meet Dee Carpenter. And then we find out Dee's secret, that Dee Carpenter is not really Dee Carpenter. He is actually Dietrich Zimmerman, and he's from Germany. And he's fighting for the American Army. And he doesn't know how anyone is going to take the fact that he's actually from Germany. And you can tell in the first few chapters that he feels a lot of guilt about what is happening in Germany and what the Nazis are doing. And he feels a lot of guilt, and he's wanting revenge for that. And so he's joined the American Army, and he wants justice. And he's fighting for the Allies. And so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on so we have more time to read. And we are moving on to the chapter on page 19 called D-Day. Fa-foom! Dee flinched and ducked. One of the big American destroyers behind his Higgins boat fired all of its guns at once, shelling the German defenses on shore. The huge shells felt like a freight train roaring past. Battleships up and down the line fired again and again, their muzzles flashing bright orange in the darkness. The Higgins boat plowed ahead through the waves, and even though it was summer, Dee was cold. The sea spray and the water at the bottom of the boat froze him to the bone. He hugged himself and crouched low, stared at the green metal helmets of the soldiers in front of him. Nobody spoke. You couldn't. You'd have to yell to be heard over the motor and the ocean, and the battleships and the planes droning by overhead. Most everybody was lost in their own thoughts anyway. Dee thought of his parents. His mother, a thin woman with long blonde hair, who worked as an illustrator for a pattern design company. His father, a short, balding man who managed a food warehouse. His parents had left behind everything they knew and everyone they loved to get Dee out of Nazi Germany. They learned a new language, started new lives, and made a new home for their son. Would he ever get to see them again? Dee felt a tear run down his cheek. He pretended to wipe away the sea spray, and he dragged his sleeve across his face. "Hey," Sid said to Dee, yelling right in his ear to be heard. "It's D-Day. Get it? D-Day, D-E-E day. This is your day, Dee. That means you're going to make it through okay." Despite the sick feeling in his stomach, Dee smiled. Every time the U.S. Army started a mission, the first day was called D-Day. That's what the D stood for. It meant day-day or starting day. There had been plenty of other D-Days before, but this was the big one, and all of the soldiers knew it. The D-Day. And Dee liked the idea of this one being D-Day, his day. It kind of was, after all. It was Dee's day for atonement. The day he came back to Europe to undo what his family had allowed to happen 11 years ago. Today was the culmination of events that had been set in motion that night Uncle Otto had disappeared. Dee heard a scream like the squeal of a radio overhead, and he looked up. A cloud of rockets shot past, fire and smoke drawing orange and gray streaks across the sky. The rockets went on and on and on, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Dee and his platoon mates looked around at each other in wonder. This was something new. Boom! Boom, 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 boom! Dee heard the rockets explode up ahead, beyond the 7-foot wall ramp at the front of their boat. Sid smiled at Dee as if to say, what could be left for us to fight after that? But the grim expressions on the faces of the veterans around them dulled Dee's optimism. At the front of the boat, Sergeant Taylor returned to yell at them. All right, you louts, this is it, he shouted. This isn't just an invasion of France. It's a toehold in Europe. The first step in pushing the Jerries all the way back to Berlin. We're the foot in the door, the wrench in the works, the kick in Hitler's pants. Dee sat up straighter, listening closely. I don't have to tell you how big this is, the sergeant continued. You've seen it. All the years of planning by the muckety-mucks in Washington and London. All the ships, planes, and tanks. All the pilots, spies, and paratroopers. The artillerymen and sailors and medics who did their part so we could be here, where we are. Right here, right now. Standing in a puddle of our own sick, with Normandy and all the Europe right behind this ramp. Everything's coming together for this one moment, and now it's all down to us, so don't mess it up. Great pep talk, Sergeant, Dee thought as the Higgins boat shuddered and bumped. The engine slowed. Sid put his helmet to Dee's helmet and bellowed in his big, deep voice. Don't worry, buddy. We're going to get through this together. Then the boat hit the beach, and the ramp fell down on history. So I know I said I was going to wait until the end to start talking, but I got so excited as I was reading it, and I just can't wait to tell you about it. So, at the beginning of this chapter, when they're talking about how Dee's parents had brought him to America to help him to get away from Nazi Germany because they didn't want him to be influenced by the Nazis. And they came to America and they had to learn a new language, they had to learn new customs. It was a completely new experience for them. I can't imagine how they would have felt. And some of you probably have some idea because you may have moved in, had to make new friends, come from a new culture, a new school. I can't imagine going all the way across the ocean to start new and basically be running away because the Nazis would consider you traitors and they would kill you. So they were literally running for their lives, and they are having to they want to raise their son in a different way. And now Dee feels like he needs to atone for that. And he feels like they didn't do anything to help the people in Germany, and that he needs to fight so that he can offer atonement. And then when they start talking about the ramp is about to fall down on history, thinking back, because this event in history really happened. D-Day was an actual event, and there were actually soldiers waiting in those Higgins boats for that ramp to drop. And just the way that Gratz explains in detail what this pep talk of the sergeant, I can't imagine what the soldiers were feeling, knowing they're hearing the bombs drop, they're hearing the fights outside, and that ramp is about to drop, and they've been told not to mess it up because it comes down to them. It's all riding on their shoulders, and I can't imagine how they would feel. And as we're reading that, I just want you to think about this. This was a real event, and he's telling an awesome story with these characters, but there were real people involved, and just he's giving you a hint of maybe some of the things they might have went through. So I couldn't wait to talk. I get excited. So now we are actually at a different part of the book called Operation Tortoise, June 6, 1944, 6 hours before the beach invasion, near Villers, Bocage, France. Sorry, some of these words are a little harder for me to pronounce than others. Just bear with me. So, we've learned about Sid and Dee, and now we're about to learn about some other characters. The dice are on the carpet. A door slammed in the sleepy French village, making 11-year-old Samira Sadane jump. She gripped her mother's hand tighter as they hurried along the road out of town. Her mother squeezed back. I'm scared too, the squeeze told her, but we'll get through this together. Samira's mother, Kinza Zidane, wore a tan raincoat and a blue kerchief, doing her best to hide her beauty and her black hair and light brown skin. Samira and her mother were French Algerian, and the Nazis weren't tolerant of anyone who didn't match their white-skinned, blonde-haired Aryan ideal. Samira wished she had brought a handkerchief to hide her hair and face too, but she got dressed too quickly and wore just a simple green dress and a brown sweater. Samira searched for the full moon in the sky, but the clouds covered it, making the road beyond the village dark and full of shadows. It wasn't quiet, though. Night was never quiet in this part of northern France, not since the German occupation began. Night after night, American and English planes droned overhead, dropping bombs on Normandy's bigger cities. Samira had heard that Caen, Vere, and Lisieux were more rebel than buildings now. The Germans, refusing to take the beating without a fight, rattled anti-aircraft guns at the bombers, drawing brilliant white lines across the sky like fireworks. Samira and her mother needed the noise and the darkness. It was well after curfew, when no one was allowed to be on the streets but soldiers. If you were caught out after curfew, you were automatically arrested and thrown into jail, if you were lucky. Samira had seen Germans shoot people as spies just for being out late. And that's what Samira's mother was, a spy for the French resistance. Samira herself wasn't a spy, but she was a convenient prop. If caught, they had a practice story that Samira was sick and Kenza was taking her to a doctor. That was why they were out so late at night and couldn't wait until morning. The Nazis were unlikely to be sympathetic, but at least it was a realistic excuse for why they were out when they shouldn't be. And a woman with an 11-year-old girl in tow was far less likely to be accused of being a spy. Samira's mother pulled her along by the hand, her eyes scanning every inch of the road and the fields. They had been out after curfew before, and it was always dangerous. But if ever there was a night to take the risk, this was it. That evening, during the nightly BBC radio broadcast from England, Samira and her mother had heard the words all of France had been waiting to hear. Les dés sont sur le tapis. Effet chaude azuz. The dice are on the carpet. It's hot in sus. These were code words. They were meaningless to the Germans, but they meant everything to the French resistance. The scattered groups of citizens who had taken up arms and were hiding out in the forests and mountains and villages, fighting a guerrilla war against the Nazi occupation. The code words meant that the Allied forces were invading France at last, and it was the job of Samira and her mother to take that message to the resistance fighters south of their little town of Villers-Bocage. As they hurried toward the woods where their contacts in the resistance were hiding, Samira remembered another desperate night journey with her mother, their escape from Paris 4 years ago. Millions of partisans had left the city in the days before the Nazis rolled in, but Samira's family had stayed. Her parents were students from Algeria at the University of Paris, and they had nowhere else to go. Samira had watched in horror as the Nazi soldiers goose-stepped their way down the Champs-Élysées, Paris's famous avenue of shops, theaters, and cafes. The Nazis had hung their swastika flag from the Arc de Triomphe and filled the Parisian cafes like they were on holiday. Samira's parents were in favor of the Algerian independence from France, but with the Nazis in control, they knew that dream would never come true. So in 1940, Samira's father had taken part in a student protest against the German occupation. But the Nazis did not take kindly to protests. In the massacre that followed, German soldiers killed Samira's father. Samira had been just 7 years old, fearing for their lives. Samira's mother had fled with her from Paris into the countryside, aided by a fledgling resistance group made up of former students turned rebels. Here among the farms and hedgerows of Normandy, using false papers to hide their identities, Samira and her mother had survived. They had worked as messengers for the resistance ever since. Samira and her mother were almost in the woods when they heard shouting and crying from up on the road. Samira's heartbeat quickened. Trouble here in the countryside, this late at night? Samira and her mother ducked into the cover of the blueberry bushes alongside the road. They crept along until they saw a group of farmhouses where French families were being dragged from their homes and loaded into trucks at gunpoint by soldiers. Nazi soldiers. Samira watched the raid from the shadows, her pulse pounding in her ears. "When will you learn?" a Nazi officer said to the French farmers in a heavily accented French. "For every one of us you kill, 100 of you will die." "This must be retaliation for the killing of Major Vogel," Samira's mother whispered. "The Nazi officer had been murdered by the French resistance less than a day ago. I've told them not to do that. They'll only send another Nazi bigwig and will always pay heavily for it." "But we did nothing!" cried one of the old men being dragged from his home. "None of us was responsible." Samira knew that it didn't matter. This was standard operating procedure for the Nazis. If one of their men was assassinated, they took revenge by rounding up 100 of the local French citizens and executing them publicly. Her heart went out to the French farmers. None of this was their fault, but they were the ones that were being punished. A flash of movement behind one of the farmhouses caught Samira's attention. "Look!" she whispered to her mother, pointing. A woman was lifting her young children out of a ground floor window to escape from the Nazis. "We have to help her," Samira's mother said. She was already standing to go to the woman's aid. "But what about the radio message?" Samira asked. "What if we get caught?" "We're in the resistance, Samira," her mother told her. "We resist." So again, I have to stop and talk about it because, wow. Oh my gosh, this just tears at my heart when I read it, because while Samira may not actually be a true person, there were people and spies who actually went through this. And the fact that they had to escape Paris after her father was killed, and then her mom wants to keep up the fight, and she's joined the French resistance, and they've been carrying messages. Just the danger that she was in by doing that. She would have been killed immediately had she been found out. And the fact that they were trying to make a difference. And then Samira is a young child, and she's being forced to become a spy, and she's watching the Nazis and how they're treating others, and she knows, just the fact that she knows that it's standard operating procedure for them to go in and just kill people is terrible. And so we've met another character. Samira is a very strong person, and Samira's mom. It would be very hard as a parent myself, my boys, it would be hard to do that knowing you were taking your child into danger. So I can't imagine having to make that decision. So we're at 17 minutes right now in the recording. I would like to try and read one more chapter. It's very short, so I think we can get through it. It is called In the Doghouse. As Samira and her mother ran to help the woman and her children, a little white dog on a rope in the backyard started to bark excitedly. "Samira," her mother whispered, "see what you can do to get that dog quiet." Samira ran for the dog. It leaped up on her happily, tail wagging, and licked her face. Yes, hello, dog," Samira said. "We need to be quiet now so the Nazis don't catch us." It was too late. German soldiers came around the side of the house with rifles in hand, and they caught the French woman and Samira's mother as they were taking the last of 4 children out the window. Samira's breath caught in her throat and stopped. "Mama!" she thought. "No!" The soldiers yelled orders in German, while the French mother begged for her children's lives. Kinza Zidane gave her daughter a look laced with fear, and Samira clapped her hand around the little dog's snout and backed into the doghouse, where she was swallowed in shadow. Samira watched, tears streaming down her face, as one of the soldiers yanked off her mother's beautiful blue kerchief and tossed it on the ground before dragging her along with the French family. "Don't come after me, Samira," her mother called out in Arabic, knowing the German guards wouldn't understand. "Get somewhere safe and stay there. I will see you again in heaven, love of my heart." Samira hiccuped a sob and put her hand over her own mouth so she wouldn't cry out. Tears streamed down her face. "Mama!" The little dog in Samira's arms started growling, and there was nothing she could do to quiet him. One of the soldiers turned at the sound, started walking toward the doghouse. Samira shook with fright. If the Nazi caught her, she would be reunited with her mother. Yes, she longed for that. But they would be reunited only until both of them were shot later that morning. Free, Samira could find help. Try to save her mother in time. The soldier came closer. The little dog fought to break free of Samira's arms. The Nazi was almost on top of her now. He was bending down. Inside, Samira screamed. What do I do? I'm trying not to tear up. It makes me emotional because this is such a hard subject, and World War II itself is very emotional because of all of the terrible things that happen to people. So you'll just have to bear with me. This is what I do when I read. I can't imagine being Samira and watching her mom being drug off, and she knew that if she didn't save her or get help to save her, that she would be killed. And she knew that if she was reunited with her mom, that she couldn't get help and that she would be killed as well. And then I can't even imagine hiding in that doghouse what she was thinking. So we're about at 20 minutes. The next chapter is only a page and a half, so I'm going to go ahead and finish it, and then that will be the last one for this recording. This one is titled Unleashed. Samir let go of the dog, and out he bounded, barking his little head off, charging the soldier like a bull. The soldier was so surprised he cried out and stumbled back, falling down on his bottom in the dirt. A few paces away, another Nazi soldier laughed. The little dog barked and snarled as he jumped around the fallen soldier. The German got tangled up in the dog's rope. That only made the other soldier laugh harder, which the fallen soldier did not seem to appreciate. Samira held deathly still as the fallen Nazi kicked at the little dog and stood. He said something harsh to the other soldier as he untangled himself. Then he backed away out of range of the little dog's rope and aimed his rifle at the dog. No! Samira almost said it out loud, and she had to catch herself before leaping out to protect the dog. She didn't want to get caught, but she didn't want the dog to die either. The other soldier said something serious through his trailing laughter. Maybe he was trying to tell the humiliated soldier not to shoot the dog, but the little dog kept barking, and the soldier kept his gun aimed right in its face. Samira couldn't take it. She couldn't let the soldier shoot the dog, even if it meant being captured herself. She crawled forward on her hands and knees. Her head had just emerged from the doghouse when, honk, honk! The German truck honking in the road made both of the soldiers turn and look. The truck must have been leaving because both soldiers suddenly ran, not wanting to miss their ride back to Bay X. Samira ducked inside the doghouse and waited until the sound of the truck was long gone before she came out again. The little dog met her at the entrance and licked her face. She wiped her eyes. You almost got us both in a whole lot of trouble, she told the little dog. His tail wagged, the threat of the soldiers in his yard already a distant memory. Here, no sense in leaving you tied up now that your family is gone, Samira said. She untied the rope around the dog's collar, but he hardly seemed to notice. He was happy to sniff around her feet. Samira went to where her mother's kerchief lay on the ground and picked it up. It was the only thing she had left of her now. Samira wrapped the kerchief around her head, tying it at the bottom, and wiped tears from her eyes again. Enough crying. Her mother had told her to get somewhere safe and stay there. There were a dozen places Samira knew she could go and find refuge at least the night, but she wasn't going to do what her mother told her. She was going to do the exact opposite. Samira had already lost her father to the Nazis, and she wasn't going to lose her mother too. Samira was going to free her mother, and the only way to do that was to find McKees. Wow. I can't imagine hiding in that doghouse and then knowing that that soldier was going to shoot that little dog, and she had finally decided that she couldn't take it. But even if she had climbed out, she couldn't have saved the dog. He probably would have killed both of them. So, but her bravery at the end, she's decided she's had enough, and she is going to help save her mother, and she's going to carry on her mother's work with the French resistance, and she's going to find the leader of the French resistance and give the message that she was supposed to give. Alright, so I hope you've enjoyed recording number 2. We read from page 19 to page 35, And then later on, we'll start video number 3. I hope that you're enjoying this. I can't wait to do a virtual meeting with you and hear your thoughts about it. Please make some notes so that you can talk about anything that you found interesting in the book. I will post more information about the virtual meeting after we've had a couple more recordings and set a date and time so we can all get together and talk about this book. I'm really enjoying reading this story with you, and I hope you're enjoying it. And thank you for putting up with me, as I obviously do not speak French. So thank you for putting up with my accent and the terrible way that I'm saying some of these words. I will see you guys in the next recording. Bye.